Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Shift. I'm Jackie Wins, and I'm here with my buddy, Jason Ray. How you doing today, Jason?
Doing good, Jackie. Got 3 weeks until postseason, so these all of these games mean so much more these last few weeks. So I'm excited to get to talk about it.
Absolutely, and it was one heck of a weekend that we had, and we are on Wednesday. We're recording on Wednesday. We won't get to some of these major games that are going to be played, but it feels like from last weekend to this weekend, we're going to see that play continue to rise. But with the Red River and that outcome, which we'll talk about here soon, I think we have sort of the scene set here as we go towards the postseason. But a few weekends left of some good softball. So, should we get right into it? Let's do it.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So, to all our fans on here, State of the Diamond, basically what Jason and I talk about is sort of what is the state right now of softball, whether it be, how we see it or what we feel about it culturally, things like that. It can go in any direction we will choose. I'm going to start off with just sort of what I did here at the top of the show, and that is the Red River rivalry. I mean, first off, two of the games were off the charts with numbers from ESPN. We anticipated it. It was a top 5 battle. And you did have Texas coming off that loss of the series from Alabama, which was wicked. And then now here they lose to Oklahoma. And an awesome pitching battle between Lowry and Cavan there for that first game. And then it continued for the second game. And God bless what happened the third game. But it really showed me a lot, at least in what the field looks like. Because right now you had OU rise to the top, which, to be fair, hasn't really done that this whole season, despite, previous years of dominance, yada, yada. Yeah. They've had to prove themselves this year, right? At the top of the year, it was Oklahoma doesn't have pitching. Jen Roach is not there. All of a sudden, pitching gets better. They've been hitting off the charts. And now, it sort of all comes together at the right time. Where Texas, not only were they pretty much favored in some polls from the preseason get-go, but it felt like they were the most consistent team for a while until that Alabama got to them. And then everyone now had questions about their pitching. And then now again, people have questions about their pitching. What is behind Cavan? And one thing that I noted as well is Cavan is a baller. Like you want to say one of the top pitchers, if not the top, arguably for sure, in the NCAA. She just has that ability to game. So for me, it was more like, whoa, we all thought this thing for many, many weeks. And then here comes Oklahoma again. So whether or not they sustain that, that's a big question. But to me, that really set the tone there of, whoa, we all had this wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to your point, two of the three games were really, really good, right? One run game and then the extra inning game on Sunday, right? So, yeah, I think you look at two teams that clearly have the opportunity to win a national championship, right? Texas is maybe struggling a little bit more than Oklahoma is. Not struggling bad in terms of, they're not playing terribly bad, right? But they're just struggling finding ways to win. I think they're 5-5 in their last 10. So, again, this is sort of what they did last year at this time of the year. They struggled a little bit, and then they kind of limped into the tournament, and then they started playing well, right? So I think it shows a couple of things on both sides. Number one, on the Oklahoma side, and you talked about, the pitching has been the one area that there's been a lot of conversation about in terms of what is that going to look like come crunch time, come towards the end of April and May. And then obviously in June, if that gets to the Women's College World Series. And you saw in Game 1 and Game 2, both Audrey Lowry pitched very well. Miley Wachenio pitched very, very well as well, right? And so was able to get those first 2 wins. And you really saw the strategy from Patty on Sunday, right? It was more so want to get some of these other kids some experience in this environment should you need them down the stretch, right? Because you got to – it's hard to run. It's hard to roll with 2 arms the entire year. So you're going to need a third, whether that be Alyssa Parker, or whether that be Kirsten Deal, or whoever that may be, Sydney Berzon, whoever that might be. You're probably going to need someone at some point, right? Just to give you maybe if it's just an inning or two in a key game. So you got to know where they're at, know if you're going to be able to trust them. So I think it showed a little bit of grit from both teams, if I'm being honest, right? I think you saw Texas on Sunday absolutely had to win that game, right? I mean, if nothing else, from the mental aspect of it, you look, and we had talked about this like kind of during it, right? Like Oklahoma, not really a gimme, right? But it was sort of one of those things where Oklahoma really didn't seem like it was as important for them to win the game as it was to get some experience. And Texas obviously needed to win, and they did what they needed to do. And I'll say this about this, and then I'll kind of go on to my where that ball that Katie Stewart hit was it's one of the furthest balls I've ever seen hit on a softball field. It was incredible. It was.
I will say I was disappointed though that it didn't break a window.
Right. Yeah, for sure. It was one of those like you just saw a ball hit the bat and like, okay, yeah, it's game's over, right? From there. So I mean, give both teams credit, right? Like Oklahoma, Gabby Garcia hit I think what was it, a 2-run home run to tie the game in the 7th. And I think this will kind of bleed into what I'm talking about a little bit, just in terms of kind of the home run, just in general, is that these teams are so good, Jackie, on the offensive side of the ball. Is if you let your hitters see these pitchers for a couple of games, like it's to the point where they're going to figure it out, right? Oklahoma started seeing Kavon a little bit better in the later innings on Sunday, right? And whatever it was, I don't know if it was Texas was ready for Audrey, or just she missed some of her spots, which you could tell she left a lot of her stuff out over the plate, right? And so, I mean, they saw her pretty well. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things where that will be interesting in my kind of area from a state of the diamond is more so from the fact of there's a lot of home runs being hit this year. I mean, we've belabored that fact. Oklahoma's at like 150. UCLA hit about 50 home runs this weekend, right? So they're obviously being sarcastic, because I think they hit 23. Like 23 in a weekend is like literally insane. And so, they're right there. Texas Tech is at 97. You've got about 4 or 5 other teams that are in the 70s, so they're on pace to hit around 100. So, I mean, I look at this stuff every single week when I'm kind of putting together these statistics, and still looking at it, it's crazy to me, right? But I think on the flip side, you've got teams like Oklahoma, who's given up 40 plus home runs. UCLA's given up 40 plus home runs. Duke is, I mean, they're playing extremely well, but they've given up like 55 home runs. So I think as you look at this going into the latter part of the season, it's almost one of those things. And which one of these teams can keep the ball in the ballpark in the pitching side, I think is going to win a championship, right? I mean, I think Oklahoma, if they pitch the way that they did Friday and Saturday, they have an excellent shot at winning a national championship. Now, the bugaboo came back on Sunday, where a lot of their hits that they gave up were home runs, and then on Friday to Saturday there was a lot of singles, and they pitched around some trouble when they had it. So, I mean, that's why I think. And Alabama lost to Stanford last night, right? Yeah. One of the best teams in the country, right? Lost to a team that's borderline top 100, and so I think it just goes to the fact that you never know what's going to happen. I think we have a thought of like these top 8 teams are much better than the rest, but you just never know. It's always about who's going to get hot, and it's going to be very, very exciting to watch some of these teams and really this wide open race this year, more so than I think it's maybe ever been in terms of just seeing who rises to the top.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, we are so focused on the year of the hitter, from our previous episodes and so on. I think the pendulum swings. I mean, I think that we see, like, if you are in youth softball right now and you see that the entire field needs pitchers, the entire field, there is not one team that I'm like, they couldn't use an additional ace. So like, I mean, it's rare. So it's your opportunity to focus there. We went so much on focus on pitching. Now everyone's focused on either two-way or whatever, like we talked about last episode. this is your moment to shine, everybody in youth softball, to start to get in that circle and work, because it's true. I mean, we have so many power hitters. If we look at Tech right from this past weekend, and I'll sort of bridge this over to our next topic, which is thrivers versus non-thrivers. I mean, Tech has, if you want to talk about has aces, and I know that there is currently speculation because we did, it was reported that Nyjah had, sort of gone down in some fashion. So I hope that she's okay and healthy. She was able to pitch again. Solid to see that. It's good for softball that she's pitching. So I'm hopeful for her and her career that she's able to keep going. But you talk about these dominant $1 million aces, they have them. They're also two-way. Which is very rare to have both of your top aces be two ways. And then they lose, right? And so they didn't lose the series, thankfully, for them. But a loss to Utah, who is strange. It's almost like it made my head turn just the same as when we, Oklahoma lost to Long Beach State. But it's not at the top of the season. And we always have to remember that. All these losses at the top of the season that were the one game, trying to get into a tournament play, a lot of people forget. Right. And so does the committee. Right. So it's until this year you watch, just because I said that. But right now to see that loss is woo. Especially because they didn't just say, oh, here we're going to pitch, our rotation. And, it was game 2. So, to me, setting up a must win on 3 against Utah, no offense to Utah fans, this year just is not competitive. So it's rough. It's rough for them. And it really threw a lot of the aspects off because of one RPI, which we'll get into. And then also we have, just their slate, their RPI, their whole strength of schedule. And now you have a loss at this point to Utah. Right? You don't quite, if it's Oklahoma State, hey, you got Ruby in there, she throws, she wins the game, they got a good ace, okay, whatever, and then you win the next, it is what it is. But they don't even have that, right? So while I think he won the series, so in my opinion, that if I don't be a hypocrite, right, to the rest of the conference, and I only leave that to the SEC, you must only win series, then they're still technically thriving. But when you look at the state of the diamond and this all, it's hard to imagine, this entire, where they're going to be seated. Depending on where the committee, puts it, if they put a lot on the eye test, that's awesome. But if they keep doing these losses, then you sort of lose the eye test too, so that's what's going to help them right now. So I worry about them. I almost think that they're in this middle ground. They're definitely thriving on one aspect, but I have a lot of questions now, depending on where they're going to be in the postseason.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You're right. From an eye test perspective, I mean, I think that's obviously the one thing that's going for them. However, you watch how they played against Utah. I mean, and the fact that, at a lineup as good as theirs is, and their two of their 3 losses, I think they have three losses now, 3 or 4, and their 2 of their losses, they were shut out in 2 of those games, right? And so, obviously losing 4-0 to Utah is not a good look. Losing 8-0, getting run ruled on your own home field against Arizona obviously is not a good look. So, yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we talked about probably last week or a couple of weeks with the schedule down the stretch for Texas Tech is really kind of coming to fruition these last few games, right? They're just not playing well necessarily up to their potential. And I think part of that is these kids that are really good, they want to be challenged, and they probably feel to a certain degree, you can just kind of walk on the field and they'll be able to win, right? Perfect examples when they played last night, Utah State. I think they were down in the 3rd inning, 7-6 to Utah State. They ran off and they scored 11 straight runs to end up run rolling them in 5 innings, right? So, they know that to a certain degree they're good enough to be able to just kind of turn it on whenever they can. Now, where that may not necessarily happen is when the competition goes up, exponentially. And unfortunately for them, it's probably not going to be in a situation where they're going to see that until probably the super regionals, right? They're going to be in a regional that's going to be somewhere. I mean, obviously they're going to have some competition as a number 2 in their regional, right? But nothing like what they'll see in super regional play and then after that. But yeah, it's going to be. I think it is the most intriguing storyline in terms of really kind of the uncertainty of where they'll be seated. And I'll talk about this. I won't steal my own thunder. Talk about that later, kind of in the RPI update. But just I think from my perspective, just a couple of teams that are thriving. I mentioned Duke. They continue to play well. They're leading the ACC now after Florida State got swept by Stanford. On the other side, Stanford really, 2 walk-off wins against Florida State this weekend, being able to sweep them. I mean, I think that was really good. And one thing we've talked about a little bit from a negative perspective, but is really kind of turning the tables the last few weeks is LSU. Got a really big series win against, obviously it was a non-conference series, but still got a series win against Arizona, right? So they are starting to hit a little bit of an upward trend. Now I still worry about them a little bit in some of these games because their offense is not explosive. They don't have the ability to put up runs in bunches, so they're really relying on the staff, particularly Jaden Heavner, to continue to pitch really well, which she has. I believe she threw a no-hitter last night against Louisiana in a run rule win. So she continues to pitch well, and she's got a good supporting cast there. So, but that team is going to be interesting to watch down the stretch, especially as the schedule's not as tough for them as they continue to go forward.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as much as I dog LSU, often they're finding their own mojo. I don't know where the mojo takes them, sort of like what you said in different ways, but like, they're enjoying it, and it feels like they're all getting on the same page. Can they continue this, and make this consistent? And it feels like that's always the issue. Right, I always expect them to compete, but they haven't been able to get over the hump to just consistently win series. Right, so we'll see. We'll see what this brings us. But
and the one thing I was going to say about them, it's very interesting. Over the last few years, they sort of started really strong and then faltered down the stretch, and it's sort of kind of the opposite this year. I think the Oklahoma series really just gave them a lot of confidence, right? Even though, I mean, it's tough to say you lose 2 out of 3, you get a lot of confidence, but the fact of how well they pitched and how well they played in those first 2 games against Oklahoma, I think that was probably the area that really gave them a lot of confidence. Say, hey, we've got the talent to be able to do this, to compete at this level. Let's go on the streak. Let's win some games. Let's play, the kind of softball that we think that we can play to be successful.
I agree. I also think they look more prepared. I just think
for sure.
their first 2 innings of the entire first third of the season, and I get it. There are times the first third of the season where things don't look great, but it looked like they were ready, and that's scary, because you're about to hit the SEC in a few weeks, right, from the top of the season, and then all of a sudden it hits you. So I think they learned a lot this season so far. We'll see how it continues. For our next one. Either teams that need to have a good weekend or series to watch, however we want to take this, because some of the series to watch means somebody's got to win because it's an important matchup. So I was going to sort of start out. So my number one thing for teams to sort of to watch because they need to have a good weekend is Missouri, because that series is going to tell us a lot. But it might also, if there's a sweep, that could be like almost the death sentence, because they need to win in order to see the postseason. And Missouri did not make it, last year, if I'm correct. And so 2 years in a row now, not doing that is rough. It's rough on a program, especially an SEC Power 4 program. Just to not even get there, right? You lose somewhere in it. But to me, that's a team that's the one that screams to me that needs to win.
Yeah, no, for sure. And kind of the area that I was going to take it with a couple of these teams in terms of what this looks like, what they need to do over the next few weeks, really, right? So, really, I mean, you had one of mine as well. So I was kind of looking at it from kind of the bottom tier of the SEC. You've got 4 teams that are really on the bubble of being even able to make the tournament when you look at Missouri, South Carolina, Auburn, and Kentucky. So remember, you have to have your overall record has to be above 500 to qualify for an large bid in the NCAA tournament. So Auburn is at 23-29. Kentucky's at 24-22. I believe South Carolina is 3 games over 500. Missouri is right at 500, right? So interesting, as you mentioned, that Missouri-South Carolina series is going to be big for both teams, right, on what that looks like moving forward. Auburn has Florida. Auburn has really just kind of fallen off the face of the earth, right? They played pretty well they hit the ball decently against Oklahoma, but since that series, they've went downhill, and they were just really non-competitive against Alabama this past weekend. Scored 1 run in 3 games, and I know Alabama's got one of the most elite staffs in the country. So that's kind of from that perspective. The other one that I've got is, I know we talk about this team a lot as well. I think it's a really big next couple of weeks, 7 or 8 games for Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's in a situation where obviously they're going to make the tournament. They're probably a 2 or a 3. They probably have an outside shot at hosting, but their next 8 games are really, really kind of murderer's row, and it's going to really elevate them or just kind of put them down to, not necessarily down to earth, but in terms of like, okay, we're 2, and then where do we go from a seeding perspective, right? So they've got Oklahoma tonight in Bedlam. They have a 3-game series against Arizona this weekend. They go to Texas in a midweek next week, and then they have a 3-game series at Baylor. So those 8 games right there. I mean, they're all RPI top, right? Oklahoma's in the top 10, Texas is in the top 10, Arizona's top 25, Baylor's just on the outside looking in, right? So it could be either feast or famine for Oklahoma State. So, I think it's important for them to, they can't, if they come out of this stretch at like 2-6, then I think that's going to be hurtful for them kind of going into the postseason and seeing what that looks like. But it's interesting. They've got to find a way, Jackie, and they probably won't see this tonight. I would pretty much bet all the money that I have in my bank account that Ruby Malin is going to be in the circle tonight. But they've got to find a way to be competitive in non-Ruby starts, right? They are a completely different team when she is in the circle versus when she's not. And it even goes into the offensive lineup as well. I think it seems to permeate through the entire team. I don't know if it's a lack of confidence. I don't know if it's just a reliance on her from kind of a leadership perspective or whatever that is. But they do seem to struggle in her non-starts. And I don't know, as I look at this, if I'm an Oklahoma State fan and I'm looking at this, and maybe even if I'm, on the staff, I'm thinking to myself, when I get into postseason play, like I can't specifically regionals, right? Like she's got to throw every pitch. Like she's got to throw every single one, unless we're down big or we're up big in the game. Maybe I can get somebody a break, but in competitive games, like do I trust any of my other pitchers that all of them have above a 4 ERA on the year? Do I trust any of these pitchers to get any meaningful outs in the postseason?
No, definitely. I wasn't even thinking about it from that, perspective. But yeah, the flip side of that, Arizona needs to win too. I just feel like they haven't had as dominant of a season as we thought they may from the top of the, from OU playing them and then being quite competitive at that point as well. And good. They did well in the transfer portal, coached well. I think for them, it's putting it all together. Like, when is it all going to click consistently through a series? So Arizona needs to win to just one, because it's a great series. So you need to get through it and you need to win it. I would love, people are going to think because I'm a Golden fan, but I would love Arizona independently, right, to win and sweep, because I think it then sends them to the postseason with confidence. It feels like they've just been like a whoop, whoop, whoop. Losing some games maybe they shouldn't, winning some games, in dominant fashion. So it just feels like a roller coaster for them. So I think sort of the same ordeal. They're in that same boat. Both need to win. One series I want to mention is the Washington-Oregon series. It feels like the proof's in the pudding between the two. Like, which one is better? Because Oregon came in like they were going to be amazing, and they just haven't lived up to that hype. Washington came in like they were not going to be amazing, and they actually did pretty okay. So now, to meet in the middle, where do they fall? And I think that's huge. I think it's big for the Big Ten. So I just overall what that landscape sort of looks like. So to me, that's a huge series, and also A&M and Mississippi State. Ricketts, man, I've been gunning for them to win a darn good series. I think they can do that. I think that they could, if they can put it all together, I think they can take Texas A&M. But it feels like the same old story sometimes. That, they pitch well, they did things, and then all of a sudden it's like it falls apart for some reason. But I think they're due they need to win a darn good series, and this could be it for them. But that's sort of the couple series that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess I had some of those. The only other one that I could mention is Texas and Georgia, right? Big 2 weeks for Georgia, right? They host Texas this weekend. They go to Oklahoma, and they go to Oklahoma next weekend, right? And so, and I think, it's interesting because I think we've mentioned a few of these series, right? And then we look at both sides, and like both sides desperately need to win for maybe different reasons, right? Texas needs to win to kind of get their bearings back, right, and continue to play well. Georgia needs to, because they've got 6 games in a row here in these next 2 weeks against 2 of the top teams in the SEC, in Texas and Oklahoma, that they really need to continue to play. They need to play well in, and they're going to kind of get a barometer and like, hey, this is where we're at, right? But yeah, I think the one that we haven't talked about that you mentioned is Washington and Oregon, the premier series in the Big Ten this weekend, right? So I think it's interesting. Washington still leads the Big Ten 15-0 overall, but really the schedule has been very beneficial for them, and it will get a little bit more difficult down the stretch as well. And UCLA is another one of those. While they don't have a big series this weekend, right? They do have Washington. They do have Oregon coming up, the last 2 series of the year of the conference play for them. So that'll be interesting to see. Once that happens, do they still continue to bash home runs like they have in the past, or does it look is it a little bit tighter?
Absolutely. And here we go to your favorite section of all time, the RPI update.
I love the RPI. So it's part of the data. So I look at this on a weekly basis, but I also look at it daily, right, on some of these things. And so, there's typically not as much updates on a daily basis. However, there is some circumstances sometimes when things flip, like if there's a big upset. Like, for example, before yesterday's game, Alabama was number 2. The loss to Samford, they dropped to number 5. Now, in the greater scheme of things, is it going to impact them all that much? Probably not. It's what they call a quad 3 loss, right? So it's quad 3 loss is anything RPI between 50 and 100. So Samford was in the 90s. Obviously, they got a tremendous jump from winning that game. They're in the low 80s. So it's probably not going to end up being catastrophic for them, right? Specifically based on how things continue to move forward in terms of what their schedule is going to look like the remainder of the SEC, right? So a couple of teams that we talked about, LSU is all the way up to number 12 in the RPI. I would say specifically with their schedule down the stretch, they're probably pretty close to a lock on being a top 16 overall. They're not going to crawl up in the top 8 or anything like that to be a seed for both regionals and supers. Duke is number 13. Really the same scenario. Their schedule is a little bit lighter down the stretch. Now they do play Tennessee tonight, which could be a big RPI boost for them if they could somehow win that game against Tennessee. So those are a couple. We've talked about Texas. Like Texas and Nebraska are 2 that are going to slide a bit. Nebraska is number 4 right now. Texas Tech is number I believe they're number 8, 7 or 8. No, 8, I think. And so 8 or 9. So they're going to probably slide a little bit. When you look at that trajectory, they're probably by the season end, they'll probably be in the neighborhood of 11 or 12. So again, that's like we talked about. That's going to be super interesting to look at as the season continues to go. Oklahoma, I know there was a lot of people that looked at Oklahoma's schedule, particularly the non-conference schedule, and this is bad. How's Oklahoma going to recover from this? Well, the SEC is how they're going to recover from this, right? The schedule, like Arkansas is the RPI number 1. They've got 3 games against them. Georgia's top 15, another 3 games against them. Oklahoma State 22, 23. That game against them, they've got A&M, who's number 19. So they've got a lot of opportunities, and their schedule is the toughest in the SEC going down the stretch. So they will probably, depending on how those games go, right, unless they take a complete nosedive, they'll probably be at the end of the year. They'll probably be in that 3 or 4 range, just because of that. Especially if they win these series 2 out of 3 in some of these series as well. I think, and we've talked about some of those host bubbles. You've got teams like Virginia Tech, Stanford, Florida State, Arizona. Those are some of the 4 that I've kind of got. They're right there among the hosting bubble. Could be 15, 16, could be out. A couple of the bracketology had Florida State sliding all the way down to number 16. So I think the Florida State's in a tough position right now. They're in a tough position because Lonnie purposely scheduled weak in the non-conference because it's a very, very young team, right? She didn't want them. She didn't think that they were in a position maybe necessarily to be challenged as much as maybe some of her teams in the past have had a lot more experience, right? So now they're in a situation where their schedule is pretty light down the stretch. They've got North Carolina, they've got Georgia Tech and Boston College, but they do have 2 midweeks with Florida. So those 2 games are going to be really, really important in terms of what their seeding ends up looking like and maybe kind of the relative weakness of the ACC this year will kind of play a role. Stanford was a team that when you looked at them, they were pretty conventionally for most people on the outside looking in terms of what their bubble situation would be in terms of a national 16 seed. But them sweeping Florida State really kind of changed the conversation a bit, which allowed them to slide up the scales quite a bit. So they're still in that discussion. I think the problem is, which is going to be interesting, is some of these teams, Florida State and Virginia Tech specifically, have a pretty weak schedule down the stretch where they're not going to get an opportunity for any of these top 10, top 25 wins. They're not really going to get an opportunity to kind of shoot up the RPI. So it'll be interesting on how some of those teams around them. And I mentioned the last thing I'll mention, as I mentioned Nebraska at number 4. Wouldn't be surprised if they slide down a little bit. Their schedule is really, really not tough down the stretch. They don't play any of the top teams. Omaha is the best team that they're going to play the remainder of the regular season, right? I think they've got Penn State in the last weekend of the regular season. Probably might be the best opponent that they play. They've got Minnesota this weekend. So really, they've done a lot of their damage in terms of what that strength of schedule looks like, and they're going to take a little bit of a hit. Now it'll be interesting to see how far they slide. They could slide all the way down to 7 or 8, and then what does that look like from a seeding perspective? Now they will have the opportunity, if things work out for them in the conference tournament, to be able to play a team like UCLA, be able to play a team like Washington or Oregon, and maybe some combination of 2 of those that will help them as they continue to go. So really interesting down the stretch as we look at some of these teams and how they perform against some of the schedule, and just a lot of pressure on some of these teams that don't have a lot of quality opponents. Makes you maybe a little bit more stressed in terms of we feel like that we've got to be perfect, we've got to play incredibly well down the stretch, and no room for error on some of these teams that we've got to beat, a la kind of the whole Alabama-Sanford situation from last night.
Definitely. When you look at the different teams, if you're somebody who, is still trying to figure out what RPI is and things like that, and the entire metric, I think we have, we have it as a segment on our show certain times as updates because historically the NCAA, selection committee, it has put some emphasis on RPI. Some years they stray a little away and you just wonder how they even got what they got. But it is this motley figure of whether it's RPI, eye test, or they pick a metric of the RPI, right? Strength of schedule, right? Or, just wins versus losses or head to head. So there's a lot of things that go into it, which is why it's important to follow the RPI and best understand, because it does have a weight in that selection. But for me, I think there's a lot of teams that don't schedule Oklahoma, that don't schedule Texas Tech, right? And they sort of get that, whatever. You start winning and nobody wants to play or whatever. The biggest thing for me is like Florida State doesn't get that right. Everyone loves playing Florida State. They either love going down there top of the season because it's a warmer region, right? Or they enjoy it, right? People respect Lonnie. Lonnie does a great deal with the development. So whenever I see their RPI down, I'm like, oh, now one could say, that if you win the Texas Tech game and things like that, and you think, it sort of helps both in a way, but they had these opportunities to just even bump them up a little bit. It would have helped probably Texas Tech more, but in terms of just bumping them, but it was surprising to me, the tactic this year. And I understood it because she does focus on development. So if you crush your team at the top, where's their confidence? But I am interested in next year if they change that up a little bit, because they will have a good amount returning. So, I don't know. I don't know where they go there, but it's tough because I also think while they lost to Stanford, and, Stanford's a good team and they get coached well, it also is hard when your competition is not that week in and week out. And we had that issue as Oklahoma fans and when the Big 12, right? And then all of a sudden you play a darn good pitcher and you lose to Baylor, right? When you should essentially never do that. So, it just sort of sets you up mindset wise. I don't think that this tanks them, overall. But regarding RPI, I mean, it did hurt them. So, it's something to watch. And if you're a fan, you're like, well, who cares anyway? They're going to do fine in postseason, potentially. But it also matters where you get seated in postseason. That can really determine your fate. Florida State fans, when I talked about Clearwater last year, they were all up in arms because they said, certain Clearwater teams didn't make it, to XYZ. I think it was the World Series. And they're like, well, we had to face Tech. Yeah. Right. Welcome to seeding, so right. So how you get seeded and all those impacting factors will impact who you play. So it was interesting to sort of see that, but RPI will either get you or help you, either one. Next one and our last one, Bedlam Preview, baby. You go from Red River, and if you're an OU fan, you're like, this is incredible. We go right to another series, and I know baseball fans are so annoyed that we have this here in softball because it doesn't exist, in the baseball world. But, when we have this series, the series, but one game matchup, however we want to call it, and you have, Ruby versus, I'm going to assume, Lowry, unless they throw someone else, OU decided to be a little different. On a Wednesday night, it's marquee Oklahoma, beautiful softball. And it's not even in one of their stadiums. We're down over there, right, for I call it the USA Stadium, Team USA Stadium, but it's whatever it is. Davin?
Yeah, Devon Park.
Devon Park, yep. So atmosphere is perfect. Hopefully it doesn't storm. Let's all pray. But outside of that, we'll take that. Sort of what I'm looking for in this is Oklahoma side. They need to start to communicate better earlier, and not at the plate. I mean, defensively we're okay, but at the plate they need to speak to each other more, because this is very much great opportunity. Think of this as game one of the World Series, right? You don't have time to be like, let's learn, like you have to go in and start communicating. Yeah, you don't first time through the lineup, of course, you're adjusting, you're talking. Second time through, I want to see them start to really make those adjustments, and stop swinging and hacking at the rise ball. God bless my soul. But it is, for me, that's what I'm looking for Oklahoma to do. Oklahoma State, they came off an interesting weekend, in terms of the accident and sort of coming together and getting through that weekend. And now you're here and you're facing, right, your fellows down the street, and it's a big game. So I think for me, it's like this is your opportunity to propel yourself forward together. If you can scratch out a win here, right? I mean, confidence-wise and like mindset-wise, your team can move forward. If you get creamed, it's just tough. It's tough on a Wednesday after what you just went through, and now you got to get into a series here that you got to win. It's rough. But for me, I think for them staying competitive, at least trying to get to that seventh inning, push Oklahoma out to try and have to win in the seventh, is an ideal world for them. If Ruby doesn't command, then I think they're in big trouble.
Yeah, no, I mean, couldn't agree more with both sides. I think one thing that was interesting from this weekend for Oklahoma was Oklahoma at the plate. I mean, you hit it, like the lack of communication at times, but I think like even more than that, there was just a lot of abnormal chases, right? They talked about that on the broadcast where just chasing pitches out of the zone. Now they were better on Sunday for sure. They were more disciplined at the plate on Sunday, but just odd, chases. I think they struck out like 13 times on Friday night. A lot of strikeouts compared to where they typically at. So, yeah, I think the communication. I think it'll be big for Oklahoma to get Pickering back where she's at, where she needs to be. I'm sure she couldn't wait to leave Austin. She just really struggled, and it's not very atypical for her. She's pretty disciplined at the plate, and really, I think at one point she struck out 6 out of 9 plate appearances at one point. So had a couple of better swings toward the end, but yeah, just really kind of as a group being able to, you're not going to score 8 to 10 runs in the SEC every week, every game, right? Like I think conceptually people understand that, right? But just a little bit more consistency at the plate. I mean, I think the one thing that you probably love that was in the interesting development that was really a little bit under the radar is Sydney Barker actually started hitting pretty well the last couple of games, got a couple of hits, really looked a little bit more comfortable, confident at the plate, and really just continues to play great defense at third, right? So I think if she can continue to kind of elevate her play, I think that's just obviously much more beneficial for Oklahoma at the plate. So I think that's one thing. I think the pitching matchup will be interesting. What Oklahoma does. I mean, Lowry, typically Patty hasn't started Lowry in midweek games, but obviously this is the best midweek opponent that Oklahoma has had throughout the year. And so that'll be interesting to see what that looks like. Wouldn't be surprised to see Wachenio go there as well. But I think on the Oklahoma State side, I mean, again, you hit it really well. They were up and down. They looked dreadful in game 2 when Ruby didn't pitch, got run ruled. I think it was like 11-0 by Iowa State, but then played really well in their other 2 games, really controlled the game. So, yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting. If you remember last year's game, Oklahoma State actually got off to a lead, 2-0, 3-0, and then Oklahoma just kind of steamrolled from there and knocked Ruby out, I think, in the second or third inning. So it'll be interesting. Again, I would expect Ruby to go. I think the mindset is very interesting from that perspective on Oklahoma State's side, understanding what they've got coming up. Not that Oklahoma doesn't have a tough schedule coming up, right? But what they've got coming up, if they get down a little bit early, do they sort of kind of mail it in and say, okay, we got to wait, we've got a lot of these games upcoming. Let's give Ruby some rest. Let's make sure that she's ready to throw 2+ games over the weekend, right, against Arizona. Which obviously the conference games are critically important for them, not only for that, but just, as we talked about for seeding. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. I hope the weather is, because I'm in Tulsa, but it's raining pretty profusely here, and there's a lot of storms around. So hopefully the weather cooperates the rest of the evening But yeah, it should be a good one, as it normally is between those two.
Absolutely, and like you mentioned, I really do hope the weather holds up, because I hate when the chances of it being rescheduled is pretty low, just based on where we're at in the season, and I don't know. It's just something that's marquee, and we lost clearly the series when we left the Big 12, but something that it's good for softball. Also sort of mentioned that on Twitter, X, or I mentioned that the Oklahoma-Texas series, the Red River, is done for 2 years. There's a lot of back and forth. Well, yeah, they may do one game, just to keep it alive and things like that. But I think there's a lot of people who are like, oh, they're definitely going to. I'm not 100%, because both sides have to agree, and it just may not work. I think it's amazing for softball. You can tell the views of that game is incredible. Both teams are going to be decent next year again. So I think overall for softball, you should have a game. But as we know, with travel logistics, to go, they would have to, I would assume, come up to Norman, right, and do that, and then they'd have to have like a home series, and go back home and be home. They have to have, it has to be placed strategically, because otherwise you're not going to put your team in a place like it gets more tired randomly in the middle of the season. But it helps RPI. And it just really depends. That being said, we're going to have to stay in this cycle for a while. They're not even going to review it, is what I'm being told, up until the cycle pretty much completes itself, which is, I think, like 2030 something. I think I was told 32 or something. Yeah, 30. So. But what I will say is, for the next, however they decide to do it next, or if they would like to review it earlier, preserving, just as they have done for football and other things, like preserving some of these rivalry series is so important, like to the culture of the game at this point. I can't even imagine it. But yeah, so that's sort of my little take there in terms of the series overall and where we're going to go. I'm hopeful that it's a good game. As always, I'm hopeful that everybody, first off with the storm, is safe, and two, the play is safe, because both teams have 2-3 weekends left to really pull it together. But as always, from Jason and I to you all, first off, thank you so much. Feel free to follow From the Stand Softball. SB right here is the little tag. We are on X. We do have our Patreon there. That's how you can get to there. And feel free. Remember, this is a volunteer sort of organization. This is not a media site that, is paid or anything like that. So it gets information and, content as it goes. But we do try every Wednesday. We also have some tricks up our sleeve that we might be announcing here pretty soon. Some special shows, some live shows, so you can just yell at us live. All the different things in terms of when seedings and other things come out. So some information coming forward to you all, but please do support the different content creators. Like I said, everyone's just living their life and writing softball because they just enjoy it and they love it. All right. So first off, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. And as always, because we have a game today, Boomer Sooner, baby, let's go. See you next time, everybody.